Let me ask you something honestly. Is there someone who has gone quiet in your life recently? Someone who used to be present, consistent, part of your everyday world, and then slowly or suddenly just stopped. Stopped reaching out, stopped checking in, stopped showing up the way they used to, and now there is this space where they used to be. This absence that you keep bumping into, especially in the quiet moments. Especially when something happens and your first instinct is to tell them, and then you remember that things are different now, that the connection that used to be there has changed or cooled or ended entirely. Maybe it was a friend you thought would be around forever. Maybe it was someone you were building something romantic with. Maybe it was a family member who created distance without explanation. Maybe it was a group of people, a whole chapter of your social life that just quietly closed without a formal ending, and you are sitting with that, trying to make sense of it. Trying to figure out what you did wrong, what you could have said differently, whether there is something you should do right now to fix it or bring it back. And underneath all of that thinking, underneath all of that analysis and second guessing and replaying of conversations, there is a feeling that is hard to name but very easy to recognize, something that sits between rejection and grief and confusion. The feeling of being left, of mattering less to someone than they matter to you, of a connection ending in a way that nobody formally acknowledged, which somehow makes it harder than a clean break would have been. I want to talk to you about that feeling today. Not to fix it immediately or wrap it in a bow or give you a 5-step plan to get over it quickly, but to offer you a different way of seeing it, because the way you interpret this moment will determine everything about how you move through it. And there is an interpretation available to you that is not about denial or toxic positivity or pretending the loss does not hurt. It is something much more grounded than that, much more honest, and ultimately much more useful. What we tell ourselves when people leave. When someone stops talking to us, the story we tell ourselves about why it happened matters enormously, and most people default to a story that puts the weight squarely on their own shoulders. I must have done something wrong, I must not have been enough, I must have said the wrong thing, been too much, been too little, been somehow fundamentally difficult to stay close to. And they carry that story around like a verdict, like proof of something unflattering about who they are. Or they tell a different story. One that goes in the opposite direction. They were never real. They were using me. Everyone eventually leaves. People are fundamentally unreliable, and connection is always temporary, and I should have known better than to trust this one. And that story, while it feels protective, while it feels like armor, is just as costly as the first one. Because it closes you off, it makes every future connection feel like a risk not worth taking. It makes you smaller and more guarded in ways that keep the very things you want at a safe but frustrating distance. Both stories are understandable, both come from a real place of pain, and neither of them is the whole truth. The possibility that most people do not consider. What if the people who stopped talking to you are not a punishment? What if they were not proof of your unworthiness or evidence of some fatal flaw in your character? What if their exit, as painful as it is, as confusing as it feels, is actually part of something being arranged on your behalf, rather than something being taken from you? I know that can sound like the kind of thing people say to make themselves feel better when things do not go the way they wanted, but stay with me for a moment, because there is something real here that goes beyond comfort. Think about the connections in your life that have ended, not just the recent ones. All of them. The friendships that fell away, the relationships that did not work out, the people who drifted or disappeared or actively chose to create distance. Now think about what came after. Not immediately after, because immediately after usually just feels like loss. But further down the road, think about the space that opened up when those connections ended. Think about what moved into that space. The people you met, the version of yourself you became. The directions your life went that it could not have gone if those previous connections had stayed intact and consumed the energy and time and emotional bandwidth that they were consuming. For most people, if they are honest, the pattern is there. The losses that felt devastating at the time created room for something better, not always faster than they wanted, not always in the form they expected, but better, more aligned, more real. What God or life or the universe, however you name it, is actually doing. There is an order to things that operates beyond what we can see in any given moment. And that order, whatever you believe about its source, has a consistent pattern when it comes to human growth and human relationships. It removes what is no longer serving you before you are ready to let it go yourself. It clears space that you would not have cleared voluntarily, because from where you are standing, the thing occupying that space still feels necessary. Still feels like something you need. still feels like something worth holding on to, even when holding on to it is quietly costing you something you cannot name yet. The person who stopped calling you, the friend who created distance, the connection that cooled without explanation. In many cases, not all, but many, that exit is not random. It is not meaningless. It is not simply proof that people are unreliable or that you are hard to love. It is the removal of something that was, knowingly or unknowingly, taking up space that something better needs in order to arrive. Because here is what most people do not realize about their social and emotional lives. They are full, not always of good things, but full. Full of old connections that have run their course, but that nobody has formally ended. Full of relationships that are comfortable but not nourishing. Full of dynamics that are familiar but quietly draining. Full of people who knew a version of you that you have grown past, who relate to you based on who you were rather than who you are becoming. And all of that fullness leaves very little room for what is actually aligned with your next chapter. When someone stops talking to you, one of the things that happens beneath the pain and the confusion and the questions is that space opens. And space, real space, emotional and energetic and relational space, is not emptiness. It is availability. It is the necessary precondition for something new, something better, something more genuinely suited to who you are right now to actually find its way to you. What the silence is teaching you. The silence that comes when someone stops reaching out is uncomfortable, but it is also, if you let it be, profoundly informative. It shows you where you are outsourcing your peace, where your sense of okayness was dependent on someone else's consistency, where you had given another person's presence more power over your emotional state than was probably healthy. Where you were, without realizing it, building your sense of security on a foundation that was never entirely yours to control. And knowing those things, as uncomfortable as it is to see them clearly, is genuinely useful, because you cannot address a dependency you cannot see. You cannot build real internal peace while it is being held hostage by someone else's behavior. The silence, as much as it hurts, is showing you where the work is, where you get to grow, where you get to develop a steadiness that does not rise and fall based on whether a particular person is showing up for you. That is not a small thing. That is one of the most valuable things a person can develop. And it is almost never developed in the comfortable, consistent, everything is fine seasons of life. It is almost always developed in exactly the kind of quiet, disorienting, uncertain season you are in right now. What to do with this season practically? Do not chase what is leaving, not because you do not care, but because chasing communicates that your peace is contingent on their presence, and your peace should never be contingent on any single person's presence. Reach out once if you feel it is necessary. Say what you need to say clearly and kindly, and then release the outcome. What is meant to stay will stay. What is meant to go will go. And your job is not to force either of those outcomes. Fill the space intentionally. The space that is open is real and it will be filled by something. The question is whether you fill it consciously, with things that align with who you are becoming, or unconsciously, by defaulting back to familiar patterns that feel comfortable but keep you in place. Choose consciously. Invest in yourself. Invest in your growth. Be deliberate about the energy and the people and the environments you invite into the space that is opened. Trust the process even when you cannot see the destination. This is the hardest part, because the destination is not visible yet. The better connections, the more aligned relationships, the people who are going to meet you where you actually are, they have not fully shown up yet. And in the gap between what left and what is coming, you have to hold something that feels a lot like faith. Not blind optimism, not denial of the pain, but a genuine grounded belief that what is being arranged for you is better than what you are grieving right now. Because it almost always is, not in spite of the loss, often because of it. The people who stopped talking to you were not your destination. They were part of your journey, and the fact that their chapter has ended does not mean your story is over. It means the next chapter is about to begin, and the next chapter needs space. It needs you available. It needs you not clinging to what was, so that you are actually present and open and ready for what is coming. Relax, not because nothing happened, but because something is happening, something you cannot fully see yet. Something that is going to make this season of silence make complete sense when you look back at it from a better place. And you are going to get to that better place. The silence is not the ending, it is just the space between chapters. I run on subscribers, not batteries. If this gave you something real today, that button costs you nothing and it means everything.